Earth has a blind spot, and yesterday it moved. A magnitude 4.7 earthquake rattled the South Sandwich Islands, a frozen chain of volcanoes at the edge of Antarctica, where there is no local seismic network and not a single human lives. The same zone produced a magnitude 8.1 in 2021 that pushed a tsunami into 4 oceans, and the world's automatic warning systems initially got it wrong. By the end of this report, you'll understand why scientists are nervous about this place, and why the next time it breaks, we may not see it coming. The signal arrived yesterday from one of the loneliest places on the planet. Global seismic networks logged a magnitude 4.7 earthquake in the South Sandwich Islands region, a frozen arc of volcanic islands in the far South Atlantic, roughly 2,000 miles east of the southern tip of South America, at the doorstep of Antarctica. No one felt it. No one lives there to feel it. And that is exactly the problem this report is about. A magnitude 4.7, on its own, is not a headline. What makes it worth your next 20 minutes is the machine that produced it. That single quake is the latest beat in a drum line that has been running all year. So far, in 2026, this one small region has produced roughly 46 earthquakes of magnitude 4 or greater. About 23 of those were magnitude 5 or stronger. The strongest, a magnitude 6.0, hit back on January 29th. Averaged over decades, this zone generates on the order of 57 magnitude 5 or greater earthquakes every single year, more than one per week, and nearly 400 at magnitude 4 or above. There are places on Earth that shake more famously. There are very few that shake this relentlessly. Here's the sentence this entire video hangs on. One of the most violent plate boundaries on Earth is quietly moving again. Almost nobody is watching it directly. And the last time it fully let go, in August of 2021, it sent a tsunami across 4 oceans from a rupture so strange that the world's automatic warning systems initially got it wrong. Let me be precise about what is and is not happening, because precision is the difference between reporting and fear-mongering. There is no new great earthquake down there. There is no confirmed swarm of unusual size, and no agency has issued any alert. What is happening is the ordinary ceaseless restlessness of a subduction zone that most people have never heard of, activity that would lead newscasts for a week if it happened under California. To put the region's output in perspective, in an average year, this single stretch of the far South Atlantic produces more magnitude 5 or greater earthquakes than California logs in several years combined. The story is not that the machine has changed. The story is that the machine never stops, that it has already shown us what it can do when it engages, and that we are watching it with the scientific equivalent of one eye from thousands of miles away. By the end of this report, you will understand what this place is, what it did in 2021, what is hiding under its ice, and why the people who study it say the next great rupture there is a matter of when, not if. The setting matters, so let's put you there. Draw a line east from the tip of South America, past the Falkland Islands, past South Georgia, into the stretch of ocean where the South Atlantic gives way to the Southern Ocean. 11 small volcanic islands rise out of that water in a curved chain, the South Sandwich Islands, part of a British overseas territory. They are battered by some of the roughest seas on Earth, locked in cold that rivals coastal Antarctica, and populated by exactly 0 human beings. The nearest permanent human presence is a small British research station at King Edward Point on South Georgia, about 800 kilometers or 500 miles to the northwest. If something happens on these islands, the closest witnesses are 2 time zones of empty ocean away. The chain has been known to exist for 2.5 centuries. Captain James Cook sighted it in 1775, and in all that time it has never hosted a permanent settlement. Even today, commercial shipping lanes and airline routes pass nowhere near it. It is entirely possible to live a full life on this planet without ever meeting a person who has seen these islands with their own eyes. Beside the islands, the seafloor plunges into the South Sandwich Trench, a gash in the bottom of the ocean that reaches roughly 8,265 meters below sea level at its lowest sounding. That is about 27,000 feet, the single lowest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. Most people, asked to name the extreme point of the Atlantic, could not place it within 1,000 miles. It is here, at the edge of the ice. The trench exists because 2 plates are colliding. The South American plate, the same slab that carries the continent, is being forced down and westward beneath a small, separate plate called the Sandwich Plate. Where the descending slab bends and dives, it drags the seafloor down with it, and that fold in the ocean floor is the trench. This is a subduction zone, the same species of plate boundary that produced the largest earthquakes ever recorded. Chile in 1960, Alaska in 1964, Japan in 2011. Subduction zones are where the planet does its heaviest lifting, And this one has been lifting, grinding, and breaking in the dark week after week for millions of years. So the picture is this: a plate boundary with world-class violence, parked in the least visited corner of the Atlantic, wearing a chain of frozen volcanoes like a crown. And it gets stranger the closer you look. The mechanics deserve one careful minute because everything else in this story flows from them. In a subduction zone, the descending plate does not slide smoothly. It sticks against the plate above it, strain builds for years or decades, and then a patch of the boundary breaks and slips all at once. That sudden slip is the earthquake. The bigger the patch and the bigger the slip, the bigger the quake. Here, the South American plate is converging at roughly 7 to 8 centimeters per year, about 3 inches. That sounds slow until you compare it. Most subduction zones creep along at a fraction of that. This is one of the faster convergence rates on the planet, which means strain accumulates quickly, which means the system reloads quickly. That is why this zone produces a magnitude 5 almost every week, while other boundaries stay quiet for years. Run the arithmetic forward, and the stakes sharpen. At 8 centimeters per year, the plates try to move past each other by 8 meters, over 26 feet, every century. Every bit of that motion, the locked boundary refuses to release, quietly gets stored in the rock as elastic strain. And stored strain has exactly 2 ways out: a steady leak of moderate earthquakes, or a great rupture that spends decades of accumulation in a single minute. The weekly drumbeat of magnitude 5s is the leak. The event we will get to shortly was the other kind of payment. The earthquakes here also come from very different levels of the machine, and that detail is more revealing than it sounds. Some quakes strike shallow, around 10 kilometers down, roughly 6 miles, near the contact where the 2 plates grind against each other. Others detonate more than 150 to 180 kilometers down, over 100 miles beneath the seafloor, inside the sinking slab itself, where the descending plate bends, dehydrates, and fractures under crushing pressure as it sinks toward the mantle. When the catalog lights up at both levels in the same window, scientists are effectively watching multiple floors of the same building, the top of the boundary cracking where the plates touch, and the slab far below still grinding its way down. Yesterday's magnitude, 4.7, is one data point from one floor. The full structure reaches further down than almost anywhere else in the Atlantic. And there is a twist that makes this zone nearly unique. Directly behind the volcanic arc, only a few hundred kilometers west of the trench, the seafloor is doing the opposite of colliding. It is tearing open. A feature called the East Scotia Ridge is actively spreading, manufacturing brand new ocean crust, while the trench next door destroys old crust. Destruction on one side, creation on the other, packed into a corridor a few hundred kilometers wide. Very few places on Earth run both processes side by side like this. The stretching thins the crust behind the volcanoes and gives magma an easier path to the surface, a detail that will matter enormously in a few minutes when we get to what is living under the ice on these islands. Hold on to the core fact: this machine is fast, layered, and always on. Now here is the part that should genuinely bother you. Almost no one is watching any of this directly. There is no dense, permanent network of seismometers on the South Sandwich Islands. There are no staffed volcano observatories, no army of instruments radioing data back from the arc itself. The environment is simply too remote, too cold, and too violent for easy instrumentation. Batteries die, ice crushes equipment, and servicing a station means mounting an expedition across some of the worst seas on Earth. Nearly everything scientists know about this zone arrives secondhand, from global seismic networks listening thousands of kilometers away, from satellites passing overhead, and from a handful of rare research cruises spread across decades. Think about what that means in practice. When the ground moves down there, the world finds out because distant sensors triangulate the shaking after it happens. Fine details, the small foreshocks, the subtle changes in pattern, the early signs that something is loading, are largely invisible. We have covered detection gaps on this channel before, and the lesson repeats. What we think is happening in a poorly monitored region is really a statement about what our instruments can see, not about what the ground is doing. In a place like this, the difference between quiet and we can't hear it is very hard to establish. Compare that to the boundaries we consider properly watched. Japan surrounds its subduction zones with thousands of land seismometers and has wired the seafloor itself with cabled ocean bottom sensors that catch ruptures within seconds at the source. The Pacific Northwest of the United States runs hundreds of stations over its own megathrust. The South Sandwich Zone, which shakes as relentlessly as almost anywhere on Earth, has effectively none of that. One of the most seismically productive corners of the planet operates on the honor system. The wider neighborhood adds perspective. In the same data window as yesterday's magnitude 4.7, the largest earthquake anywhere along the Antarctic rim was a magnitude 5.3 near the Balleny Islands, on the opposite side of the continent unrelated to this zone, but a reminder that the entire margin of the Antarctic region is faintly, continuously alive. And a 2017 University of Edinburgh survey identified on the order of 138 volcanoes in the West Antarctic Rift system, most of them buried under the ice sheet. A separate volcanic province working on slow geological timescales, not a countdown, but proof that the far south is far busier underground than the public imagines. So we have a hyperactive plate boundary running hot, effectively unsupervised. The obvious question is, what happens when a system like that fully engages? We do not have to speculate. It happened less than 5 years ago, and the way it unfolded is the most important part of this story. On August 12, 2021, the South Sandwich Zone let go. It started with a magnitude 7.5, a major earthquake by any standard, the kind that makes global wires on a normal day. Then, roughly 3 minutes later, the real event arrived. A magnitude 8.1, one of the largest earthquakes recorded anywhere on Earth that year, rupturing along the same boundary while the first shock was still settling. The main shock was not a normal rupture, and this is where the story turns unsettling. It broke slowly, a long, drawn-out, complex rupture that unzipped the boundary over an unusually stretched window of time instead of releasing its energy in one sharp crack. Automatic monitoring systems, which estimate an earthquake's size in the first minutes from the initial burst of seismic waves, read it wrong. The early solutions dramatically undercharacterized the event. Only later, as analysts worked through the full waveforms, did the true picture resolve. A great earthquake, magnitude 8.1, had effectively hidden inside its own seismic signature. A quake powerful enough to move oceans was briefly misfiled by the very systems built to catch it. The physics of that failure deserves a closer look. Automatic systems lean on the sharp, rapid shaking an earthquake radiates in its first minutes, and a fast rupture pours its energy into exactly those frequencies. A slow rupture does the opposite. It releases an outsized share of its energy as long, gradual ground motion that quick-look algorithms are not tuned to weigh. Seismologists have a name for the extreme end of this family: tsunami earthquakes, events that shake far less than they should for the water they move. The 2021 main shock sat in that deceptive territory, and it took human analysts working through the complete waveforms to see it whole. Let that mechanism sink in, because it is the investigative core of this report. Tsunami warnings begin with magnitude estimates. When the magnitude is wrong in the first minutes, everything downstream of it, the alerts, the forecasts, the decisions, starts from a false number. In 2021, the error cost nothing, for one reason only: there was nobody nearby to warn. The nearest coastline with people on it was 500 miles away, and the wave that arrived there was small. But the physics does not care where the people are. The same slow, deceptive rupture style on a bigger patch of this same boundary is a scenario scientists take seriously. And it is the reason the phrase "we won't see it coming" is not clickbait here. It is a documented failure mode. 2 large ruptures in rapid succession is also not some one-time fluke of the far south. Just over a week ago, in late June, we covered Venezuela's earthquake doublet. A magnitude 7.2 followed in under a minute by a 7.5 on the other side of the same South American plate. Rapid-fire pairing is a recurring behavior of major fault systems, and this frozen trench delivered one of the clearest examples of the decade. And what that 2021 rupture did to the world's oceans is where this stops being an abstract seismology lesson. The magnitude 8.1 displaced the seafloor, and the seafloor displaced the ocean. A tsunami spread outward from the trench, not a towering wall of water, but a low, broad pulse of energy that rolled across the open sea. And then it kept going. Tide gauges recorded that wave across the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and the Southern Ocean, 4 oceans, at stations more than 10,000 kilometers from the rupture. It registered at South Georgia. It registered in the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa. It registered in Hawaii. It registered along the North American west coast, all the way up to Alaska and the Aleutian Islands. A crack in the seafloor at the edge of Antarctica quietly touched beaches in the northern hemisphere. The wave managed that reach partly because of how tsunamis travel. In the open ocean, a tsunami is nearly invisible, a broad swell centimeters high, moving at the speed of a jetliner, and it sheds very little energy as it goes. Undersea mountain chains act as guides, and researchers found this wave tracking along mid-ocean ridges like traffic following highways. Only at the coast, where shallowing water compresses all of that moving energy upward, does the height grow. In 2021, the pulse stayed small because the displacement at the source was modest. A larger or shallower rupture would scale everything downstream of it. At King Edward Point, the research station 500 miles from the source, the water arrived about an hour and a half after the quake and ran up to roughly 75 centimeters, at about 2.5 feet. That number sounds small, and in 2021 it was harmless because the coastlines it reached first are essentially empty. But the mismatch is the message. An event with no victims still demonstrated planet-scale reach. A 2024 study in the Journal of Geophysical Research. Oceans examined this event and described it as an example of an underestimated widespread tsunami hazard. A polite, peer-reviewed way of saying the world's tsunami maps do not fully price in what this region can export. Longtime viewers know the Atlantic is not supposed to be immune. When we examined the Atlantic's tsunami record in June, the history was blunt. 1929, Grand Banks, an undersea landslide that killed 28 people in Newfoundland. 1755, Lisbon, a quake-driven wave that crossed the entire basin. The South Sandwich Zone adds a standing, active source at the basin's southern gate, one that has now demonstrated in the instrumental era that it can put measurable water on shores an ocean away. That is why yesterday's magnitude 4.7 earns coverage, not because it is dangerous by itself, but because it is the idle rumble of the one machine in the Atlantic that has recently proven global reach. The earthquakes are only half of what this zone is doing, because the same engine is also building volcanoes, and they are among the strangest on Earth. The 11 islands of the chain are the summits of active or recently active volcanoes, several of them wearing permanent caps of glacier ice. Fire below, ice on top, ocean all around, and no one watching from closer than 500 miles. Start with Mount Michael on Saunders Island. Inside its summit crater sits a persistent lava lake, a pool of continuously molten rock, churning in the open air that never freezes over. Persistent lava lakes are one of the rarest volcanic features on the planet. Only a handful exist, and most of the others sit on volcanoes scientists can drive to. This one was confirmed largely from orbit. Satellite thermal sensors kept flagging a heat source in the crater year after year, and analysis put the lake's surface temperature in excess of 1,000 degrees Celsius, over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, glowing on an island where the surrounding air hovers near freezing. Almost no human being has ever stood at the rim to look at it. We know it exists the same way we know most things about this region, because something in space happened to be pointing in the right way. A persistent lake is also a message about the plumbing underneath. Keeping molten rock exposed and circulating at the surface in sub-Antarctic cold requires a continuous, balanced supply of fresh magma from below. Throttle the supply and the lake crusts over, surge it and the crater overflows. The fact that this lake has stayed open for decades means the furnace under Saunders Island runs steadily, not in fits. Then there's Mount Belinda on Montague Island. Between 2001 and 2007, it erupted more or less continuously, and during that eruption, lava poured out across the island's ice cap and flowed all the way into the sea. Molten rock, glacier ice, and freezing ocean meeting in one place, directly observed by satellite. Eruptions in this chain have also shed floating rafts of pumice, lightweight volcanic stone that drifts on the currents for thousands of kilometers, occasionally far enough to interfere with shipping lanes. Debris from this forgotten ark has, quite literally, sailed around the world. Here's the connection that makes the volcanoes part of the earthquake story, rather than a separate one. The same slab of South American plate that generates the quakes, the shallow grinding at the interface, the fracturing 100 miles down, is also the fuel line for these volcanoes. As the slab sinks and heats, it sweats water into the mantle above it, and that water lowers the melting point of the rock and generates the magma that feeds Mount Michael's lava lake and Mount Belinda's eruptions. Earthquakes and eruptions here are two outputs of one machine. Watching the seismicity is, indirectly, watching the volcanic system supply line, which matters because nobody's watching the volcanoes directly either. Any story with the word Antarctica in it attracts theories, and this one is circulating with two. The first claim ties the current activity to a bigger narrative that Antarctica is waking up, destabilizing, or beginning to crack apart. The data says otherwise. This zone has always been this active. Multiple magnitude 5s in a month is its normal operating state. This year's tally sits comfortably inside its long-term average, and the quakes are confined to a well-mapped plate boundary, not spreading across the continent. A second version points at the sun, noting that a strong G3 geomagnetic storm was in progress yesterday, the same day as the magnitude 4.7. The overlap is real. The causation is not. Large statistical studies have searched for a reproducible link between solar storms and earthquakes and have not found one. Yesterday, a solar storm happened during a week when this zone produced quakes, which describes most weeks, because this zone always produces quakes. Two things happening on the same day is a calendar, not a mechanism. There is also a quieter suspicion worth addressing, that if a region this dangerous is barely monitored, someone must be hiding something. The reality is less cinematic. Every earthquake detected down there is published openly by global agencies within minutes, available to anyone. The coverage is thin because instruments there are brutally expensive to install and maintain, not because the data is secret. The gap is a budget line, not a conspiracy. The honest read on the current activity is this. It is most likely the ordinary breathing of the boundary, not a countdown. Given a baseline of dozens of magnitude 4 to 6 earthquakes per year, nothing in the present pattern is statistically unusual, and no method exists, anywhere, for any fault, to reliably forecast whether a great earthquake is days or decades away. But the flip side is just as factual. Subduction zones that have produced magnitude 8 ruptures retain the capacity to produce them again, and this one reloads faster than most. The next great rupture at the South Sandwich Trench is not a hypothetical. It is an eventuality without a date. So here is the watch list, in plain terms. A magnitude 6 or larger in the zone would be the clearest escalation signal short of the real thing. Clustering matters. A tight sequence of magnitude 5s in days rather than weeks would stand out against the baseline. Depth stacking matters. Shallow interface quakes and intraslab quakes from 100 miles down lighting up together, the whole machine engaging at once. Beyond the seismometers, the two proxies worth tracking are the tide gauge at King Edward Point, the nearest instrument that would confirm any water movement, and satellite thermal readings over Mount Michael, where a significant change in the lava lake would hint that the system's fuel line is surging. These are the same signals analysts will be reading, from the same distance as the rest of us. The 2021 event left one genuinely useful legacy. Warning centers now know this zone can produce slow, deceptive ruptures that fool the first automated estimates, and great earthquake solutions from this region get a harder second look than they did 5 years ago. Whether that awareness translates into fast, accurate warnings for far coastlines during the next rupture is an open question. The honest answer is that it has not been tested, and the gap between knowing a failure mode exists and being ready for it is exactly where this story lives. What is certain is that the machine at the bottom of the Atlantic is still running. It moved again yesterday. It will move again this week, and next week, and the week after, until one of those movements is the one that matters. We will be tracking this zone as it develops, and if it stirs in a way that breaks its own baseline, you will hear about it here first.